Welcome to Stat, I'm telling you all medical true crime stories, and it gets bizarre. Karen Wickham, yeah, she used to work in ER, and now she's sharing the knowledge, so let's get involved. Hey, funny and scary at the same time. Medical mysteries, all facts, she ain't lying. So tune in to Stat if you dare, cause crazy things can happen anytime, anywhere. Yeah.
Hello, everybody out there in podcast land. Welcome to Stat, Shocking Traumas and Treatments, and I am your host, Karen Wickham, coming to you from beautiful Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And I am really excited about today's show because I have a guest on. And this guest is none other than Ashley Lecker, who do you say it Lecker or Lecca?
Lecker. Yep, you said it right.
Okay. Because I'm sure you know, I looked up Lecker means yummy in German.
Yes, it does.
So
and it's my husband's, it's my married name. And so yes, we have, and in our house we have a couple of different like German Lecker poster types of things that he has. And so because my maiden name is Dutch, it's Raymaker. So, but yes. Yep, last name.
Well, it was meant to be for what your interests are. I just thought it was kind of cool. So, yeah. Ashley is the author of the Serial Killer Cookbook, which I think is probably one of the coolest books out there.
Thank you.
And you're a real Renaissance woman. Why don't you tell everybody, you are involved, have so many interests, but I mean, you've lived a really interesting life. So can you just tell everybody about yourself?
Sure. Thank you. I've done a lot of different types of things that are, not always related, but sort of that's brought me here. I live in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I live with my family here. I have two boys who are 8 and 5, and my husband. But what I started off doing is I started off working in politics, is where I started working. I worked for the House of Representatives. I also did advocacy through the county, through nonprofit work. And then I have my teaching license. I teach either English or social studies all the way from 6th to 12th grade. And that's actually currently what I'm doing, is teaching. Cool. And then also blogging and writing too. So it's been it's just, I tell my students this too. I'm like, you never pass up chances to do something different or to incorporate things that you already love, because a lot of things can be strung together. And, take those chances to learn how to do something different, because you never need to be stuck in one place. That there's always options. That's
an amazing, that's an excellent lesson to teach them, or, guide them, because you're absolutely right. That you may have a love for something that can, might start off as a hobby and then do something completely different, but somehow they can come together, and that's a great lesson to teach.
Yes, they can. I always tell them I left high school looking to do equine science, because I also showed horses when I was younger too.
Whoa.
And I ended up I ended up doing political science instead of working in Congress. And so things change, and things that you never knew you were interested in. Now I teach, and I also talk about true crime, and I make delicious recipes too. So sometimes where you start, you don't always land in the same spot, but that's okay.
Have you ever thought about doing a podcast? Because you could do a true crime cooking podcast.
That would be really fun. I have.
Or a video, a YouTube thing. I could just totally see you cooking a last meal, talking about a serial killer. Sorry, I just get all excited about things.
I would love that. I have thought about that. I just haven't had time to put the pieces together to make something like that happen.
And you've got so much going on.
In my head, it probably sounds way more. In my head, I always think it's probably a lot more, a lot of things, a lot more work to put together than it is. And everything else, it's just sort of perseverance and interest that keeps anything going. And so, I've thought about it. I've just never taken the steps to see what I would need to do to create that.
Well, it's not like you're lying around your house eating bonbons all day. You've got a lot going on in your life.
Pretty much. Watching the British baking show or something on or some kind of serial killer documentary. It's usually alternating between those things.
I love it. I think it's so cool. I remember I sort of came out of the true crime closet in my 30s because I was like, people are going to think that I am a terrible, human being. But now I'm just like, yeah, I'm talking about it. I love to talk about it. For me, it's all about what causes it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's for a lot of people, but it's funny. I just happened to be looking for, crazy, call me crazy, for a new true crime book to read. And I was on Amazon, and then I see your book. I'm like, no, this can't be for real. And I showed it to my wife, and she goes, that's morbid. And I'm like, yeah.
Yep, it is.
And then
funny, there's a lot of us out there too.
No, there are. And I've seen things like, on online about last meals for on death row, but I've never seen it put together. I think this must be a one-of-a-kind book.
It is. There's a couple others that are out there that are similar, but they didn't, or they'll just have a couple things. Like I've seen some photography projects people have done with last meals, but it doesn't have as many people as we included. And this doesn't even include, and this is just a fraction of the people who we could have included when looking at all of the different people that were options. And I know there's a lot of true crime lovers out there. I mean, there's a lot of us out there. And there are definitely people who think we're a little weird or they just don't get into it. And they're like, oh, I don't know. But
so I say some of them haven't come out of the true crime closet yet.
I think so. Or they haven't just kind of, sometimes I think it's just there's a couple cases that people initially start with, and then that kind of brings them down. They start to snowball then with it and want to learn more. When they start to look at, because usually it's someone always has that kind of that first case that they get really interested in, and they keep watching of it and they keep looking and wanting more information. And that gets them into really enjoying true crime.
Well, it's funny.
Or their parents, mine watched my parents watch a lot of Law and Order.
Okay.
So I was growing up.
So it's hereditary?
So I think it was probably just having them watching that all the time that I remember.
Well,
I remember those episodes.
My wife is very wholesome. She's a massage therapist, and she's all very, a very wholesome person. And the other day we were watching something, and she goes, isn't that Ed Kemper? And I'm like, what? You know the name. So now she knows all these names of serial killers and different cases. And right. She says, I've tainted her.
You tainted her, yes. She could ID the co-ed killer. Good for her.
Yeah.
Figure out who that was, right? Mm-hmm.
So I'm just but I'm like, isn't it? It's the brain part of it. It's the how does it happen part of it. And I think that's what fascinates her as well. And so now we'll watch something, and I'm like, are you sure you want to watch this? Because, it might be a bit much. She's like, no, I'll see. So.
Yes.
And then when she saw your book, she was like, no, this is really cool. So I guess she didn't really understand what it was all about to begin with. Okay, so I saw your book, and I ordered it immediately, and I put it out there on my Facebook page, and people, because I was really kind of trying to show Mary that I'm not, too morbid, and the response was, I'm buying mine right now.
Good. Well, that's awesome. Thank you.
Okay, so a couple.
It's a good time of year too.
It's oh yes, it's a great Christmas gift. Absolutely. So this book is beautifully morbid and deliciously executed. You see what I did there?
Yes, I like that.
Yeah,
I like it.
Yeah, I wrote it down. I'm like, that was really good. I'm gonna have to say that as punny as it is, or not. So as I'm looking through the book, there's so many things that I find. It's the picture, the photography is beautiful. The recipes are amazing. It's just so beautifully professionally done, and the trivia is incredible. So how did you come about wanting, like, putting it together as you did?
So when the process, the first part of this was when I was, well, actually, Claire from Ulysses Press contacted me and was just like, would you be interested in doing this type of a book? Because I talk about true crime sometimes in my blog. And I said, yes, I would love to do that type of book. What are we going to, how do we start planning? So we started planning, and the first thing that we did was identifying who we were going to highlight in this book. And I wanted to have a variety. I know some of the things, I also learned, as I did this, because I learned that, many people thought that there's quite a few ice cream recipes in there, which there are. There's some definite trends of taste preferences for people, incarcerated people, and very nostalgic too. But so trying to pick people who I could research enough to be able to find information about them, because sometimes that's a little trickier. It's depending on the person. And then also having a good variety of food in the book, because regionally with the death penalty and executions, every state does not have it in the United States. And so really many of the concentration of it is in the southern part of the United States. So there's definitely a lot of southern food in the book. And so kind of looking through the people of what were some of the stories that we could highlight, and what were some of the recipes to give a variety to the reader, without being too redundant. And so as you can see, ice cream was always a huge thing. I mean, and I think a lot of that nostalgic food is just that it's not surprising to me that if somebody is really having their last meal, who doesn't love ice cream?
That's the thing. It's all comfort food. That's the sense I got from it, other than maybe one or two things. And so I've never heard of no churn ice cream before.
Yeah.
I just think about the churned ice cream, and then I'm like, okay, let's check this out. And I'm 100% making every flavor of it that I can come up with.
Yeah, it's so easy. It's great.
And it's all dense. It's not full of air and oil and stuff. It's going to be almost dense, gelato, but ice cream.
Yeah, it's a really dense, really a scoopable ice cream, which is really good.
So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, and there's some interesting things in there, things that people wanted that were, different than what we would, somewhat different than what we would think about. We have the person with the SpaghettiOs that we made. Those noodles were so hard to track down because SpaghettiOs have two different size O's.
Really?
Them. And so, there's the larger circle and the smaller circle. And
okay.
So finding the different sizes was challenging, but I found them. And so eventually, that was a fun one to make. But yeah, and so the process of going through and doing research on these people who are in here, a lot of that because people on death row who are facing execution are usually in the news and the media, because it's a bigger event when they do these things. So finding information about them, there's lots of different types of books out there. There's a lot of news reports from the different areas that they live in.
Okay.
All of that's public record. And so to be able to read through and see what the details were. And some people are obviously very famous, like Ted Bundy and John Wayne Gacy, and so it is not difficult to find information on them, certainly.
Well, I think the variety of killers in here, it's excellent, because you go from. Is it okay if I talk about a book a bit? Because I don't want to give too much away. Yeah. I want people to. I'll keep it on the download a bit, but you have killers that go back to the late 1800s, all the way up to pretty recent. So I think that's really cool, because it gives you a great, a very famous death row people that are serial killers to someone that is not as well known. So I learned a lot just reading through the book.
Yeah, one jumps out to me is Fritz Haarmann, he's German, and he was known as the Vampire of Hanover, and he died in 1925. And so he's one of the ones that went back further, and there's a few that are like that. And it's interesting to see how their last meals kind of vary a bit too.
Based on where they live, right?
based on where they live, and also the time too, because his was just, he wanted just like coffee and like I think a cigar.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And then going to people who are more recent, like we have people who just like, it was like quantity of like, how much can I, like I think offhand, one of them, and then there's Lawrence Russell Brewer, who is, people know who he is typically because he's the one who ordered just that ridiculous amount of food.
He's the one that ruined it for Texas last meals, right?
He did, and that was in 2011. So that was pretty recent. But yeah, he ruined it kind of for Texas. For they don't let people, essentially your last meals, whatever's on the calendar that day.
So he like ruined it for all the next death row people. So
right,
he's a sick bastard to begin with, but then he's like a ghost of the prison because they all have to have prison slop.
I know. People must have been so annoyed with him,
yeah.
like because and he ordered a third amount of things, like, and he was pretty I mean, they're all awful, like really the people in here, but he was particular. The reason he was there was because of a hate crime, and so against a black man named James Byrd.
Mm-hmm.
So he was never a remorseful person for what he did, and so he was not a good person anyways before he decided to ruin the last meals, but he was a pretty bad person prior to that too.
Oh yeah, he's just the worst human being out there, and I'm just looking right now at his last meal, and it's absolutely ridiculous.
So ridiculous.
I could see someone ordering a lot and saying, okay, well, I'm going to share it with some of my, death row people. But then we're talking about death row people that probably don't want to share.
Right. And there were people that did share. Not a lot, because it probably depends on the prison, like the state that they were in, what was allowed. But there are some that did share. Typically, who would they be sharing with? Like, they would share with like other people, or maybe like their attorney or whoever, things like that. And so some did that, but not usually. And that could have been because they weren't allowed to, or just because they didn't want to.
Yeah. So okay? I just have to point this one out. Who's the creepy dude that ordered just one olive?
Oh,
what's his problem?
So that was Robert Anthony Buell. He, I think sometimes it was to make kind of a stand for them, like themselves, because he wanted just an olive. So what I made is I did like a single olive top nut for like the recipe that I created.
It's delicious.
Based off of that one.
I looked at this and I'm like, for the creepy guy that said one olive, you've turned it into like an amazing looking recipe, that's why I just thought it was so cool what you did.
It was, and I love olives like
Same.
So much. Like they're one of my favorite things. And so so the single olive top done. I'm not sure why he did that, and that's the tricky thing of researching some of them is that they don't tell anyone. They just because they're narcissists. I mean, I can't imagine there's one that's not really. And so I think sometimes they just do things just because, just to be like, just to kind of prove their point in a way, like either order obscene amounts of food or order something really strange to just be like, I don't care.
Yeah, something they're making some kind of thing that makes them stand out, above
Mm-hmm.
other people. And there was quite a sophisticated one I was looking at. I'm just, sorry, I just hit my mic stand. I was just flipping through. I'll see. I'm gonna look for it and see if I can find it. Okay, so here's one of the questions I wanted to ask you. What would be your last meal?
Oh, I get asked this often, I would say, and I feel like it changes. And so I would assume for some of these people that it probably changed for them too, depending on where they, like it seems to change for me at like the time of year too.
Yeah, I can get that.
Because I think I would do, oh my gosh, what would I do? I think that I would, I'm from Wisconsin, like we do a lot of like grilling of foods. And I think I would, and we have lots of cheese, so I would definitely have to have some kind of cheese.
Oh, yeah.
I would want like really good pickles, because I love pickles too. Pickles too.
Cool.
I think I maybe would do I think I would maybe just like grill some bratwurst and have that with like.
Or charcuterie.
Yeah. A really good an old fashioned like drink, like, and so I think maybe I would go that direction.
Oh, you'd be very fancy.
So I feel like Yeah, I feel like it depends on what I like. Some days I would just I would just want like spaghetti.
Yeah, for sure.
Today.
I was looking.
I think I would want that. There's a place in where I live that makes these they do these German chocolate Bismarck donuts that are like one of my favorite things. I think I'd want one of those.
I've heard of those.
It's filled with a custard, and on top they do a caramel and coconut and chocolate thing. It's really good.
That's dangerous. You'd have to have one of those for sure. I was so I was looking through the book, and obviously, I mean, why I just say things that are so obvious sometimes. So I decided to pick out the meal that would be mine related to the ones that are in the book. And so I figured, I'm just looking at my notes here, I would relate to Ronnie Lee Gardner.
Oh, okay. Let me look at what his...
Lobster tail, steak, apple pie. I'm just like, yeah.
He's a good one. And he was the Lord of the Rings films, too. He requested that. I feel he was actually thinking, he was what can I do that will be an experience for me?
My last days
because
here.
He requests to watch the Lord of the Rings films while he's eating this. Yeah. He is and he was so, he is such an extreme individual, too, if you read about him, of just, because he he said he was part of the Mormon church because he had, but they have refuted that, too. There's been some back and forth about them being no, he didn't do these things because he, and so he was really, a really extreme person.
Well, when I read about him, I kind of made me sad a bit because of his. I tried to divide the child that they were to the monster that they become, because I think there's a divide there. I think some people are born evil, quote unquote, but they're still children, and whatever happens between the two. It's like Heather's podcast, Nature versus Narcissism, which is it? And so I think about some of the things that they experienced that could have led to, and I just see this guy, wanting to watch Lord of the Rings, which makes me think, is this sort of like a kid in him that, I don't know, maybe I looked in it too much, but it was sort of do you know where I'm going with that?
Yeah, he, and he was subject to some pretty severe abuse, both physical and sexual abuse, and exposure to drugs at a young age as well. And so he had a lot of issues that were, that caused just in those formative years so really it's difficult to know what he would have been like, because he was also in and out of institutions. And so he never had any kind of normal, his childhood was not normal.
It was horrific.
It was really bad. And multiple escapes from different facilities and jail too. And so he was not, he was isolated for a lot of time as well. So,
the fact that he got out of so many, you guys should look up this guy, Ronnie Lee Gardner. Go check him out. In fact, I was thinking of maybe even doing an episode. I know it's not medical, so to speak, but because it is in a sense of mental health and abuse, I find this case really interesting, just because of, you know what I mean, being a true crime person.
Yeah.
It sounds morbid me saying that, but just what leads to that, and then how he was able to escape and the things that he did. It's almost like there was no end to what he was willing to do.
No, he was not. He was going to be violent within the prison as well when he was there. And so, and he ultimately wanted to have a firing squad because he had claimed a Mormon background, and there's a belief within Mormonism of blood atonement, which is essentially that a crime is bad enough that the person who is the criminal, their blood has to be spilled, and so he requested a firing squad, which was when I think there might still be a state or two that allows those. I don't think it's something that they really want people to do. So I'd have to look up and see if there's still any states that allow it. But when they would do those, they would only have not everybody would actually have bullets in their gun, so that some were rubber, and it was a way for the people who would be doing the execution not to really know who was the person who killed him.
Like literally who pulled the trigger kind of thing, even though they all
did, it was sort of, there was no definitive way to know whose weapon it came from.
I find it really ironic that there's so much discussion about humanely ending a life of someone who did absolutely horrific things. Now, I'm not, saying that people should be tortured or anything like that, but there's so much discussion that goes into that, that part of me says, well, they look what they did. And the other part of me is like, no, we're humane human beings here. We can't we can't go to where they go. But I find that a really interesting discussion just in itself.
It is, and it's really it's a very moral discussion too, of that we know that ending other people's lives is wrong. Unless even in cases of people who that happens in self-defense, they still struggle with that. But when we look at some of the people who are in this book, that they, their victims weren't allotted like last meals or things like that. And most of them were killed in really awful ways too. And many of them younger people too, just because, many times serial killers tend to, or, criminals who commit murder will tend to prey on victims who, they won't know that they're missing. They're younger, they're more easily manipulated. That's why many times people who are in the sex work industry are many times the ones who suffer at the hands of serial killers, because they're an easier target.
And they're already you don't wake up one day and say, I'm going to go become a prostitute. Something has led to that. And so they're already victims to begin with. And then, further, then they're victimized even further and killed. And then I find a hard time saying, okay, well, let's find a humane way of putting this, of executing this person. Because some people are very against executions to begin with. And again, we won't get into it too much because that's a whole other moral, ethical discussion.
Right.
And, but, again, my wife asked me this morning, do you believe in capital punishment? Do you believe in the death penalty? And I said, it depends on who it is. I can't answer that. I mean, I'm a very passionate person about stuff. And if I think about a serial killer pedophile, I'm going to be like, just do it. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. There's definitely people like that in here. Yeah, it's definitely a very difficult question, because I get asked that a lot too, just with the nature of the book. And, my answer is typically no. I don't think that it's an appropriate method of punishment. However, a lot of those things are dependent on what the situation is. I think if that was someone I loved or something like that, my answer would probably be different.
Yeah.
Most of us have the ability to put some distance between ourselves and those types of things, but thankfully, most people are not. Is rare to find yourself in a situation that is someone that you know and love, but it does happen, and I think that answers can be different. It's just it's a tricky thing, I think.
Well, and there's innocent people that have been that have been executed, and that's a big one for me. Like, what if the person's innocent? They're already in prison, right, and now they're executed, and they're innocent. And then, again, I want to be a humane, person. I'm a nurse. I'm a retired nurse. So that part of me goes, no. We can't. I can't think that way. Then the other part of me, like I said, it depends on the case, really.
It depends on the case, and it's tricky because, it's hard to, sometimes I think that it is hard to say, like, it does depend on the case. And that is why they have, within cases that have with capital crimes that are death penalty cases within those states that still have it, not everyone who is tried for a capital crime means that they're going to get the death penalty. I mean, it does, it truly, I think sometimes is reserved for the most heinous types of crimes. That being said, are there innocent people? There definitely are. Are there more people who aren't innocent? I mean, that would be hard for me to say.
Yeah.
But, with things like the Innocence Project, with some of the different types of organizations that are out there that are looking at more scientific facts within those cases, I think that sometimes there are people who come out of being that they were innocent, but not always. And so it can, I think it does, there has to be some significant doubt, I think.
Oh, for sure. There's something else that came up that I think I'm going to cover on my show is the case. Is it Ricky Recker? What was his name? It's one of the killers in the book here. What's his name?
Oh, is that Ricky Ray Rector? Is that the...
Yeah. So what made me think here? It led me down a path of he's a horrible person that did horrible things, and at the end he ends up shooting himself in the head and surviving with major frontal lobe damage. So I started thinking about it and going, what if the person that you were and then something like this happens and what you are now are different? How do you try that?
Yeah, and that case is so... Ricky Ray Rector's case is one that I think about. Sometimes there's another person here named Joel Arity that I think about as well. Because Ricky Ray Rector had a really, he killed quite a few people. And it was, and then with the frontal lobe damage. And he was not, he had significant brain damage. They tried to object and to avoid going to trial, but he was not... He was still convicted, obviously, and sentenced to death. What was happening at the time, too, is this was in the early 90s. And it was at the time when Bill Clinton was the governor of Arkansas. That's when he was running for president.
So it became political.
There was, that he really wanted to show that and that was at the time where, there was the whole kind of, saying of, people being soft on crime. That was, shortly after the big war on drugs, all of those types of things that were happening. And I think that, even now, would that have gone how it was? I don't think so. But I think at the time it was almost an option for a political stance, which is really too bad because he didn't have even the kind of wherewithal that he was going to be executed when, and so he really, that was a struggle. I think that had that happened now, I don't think that would have gone the same way.
And it falls. There's people that have very low IQ, so have intellectual. I don't like using the word disability, but for I'm using it now. That commit these crimes, and at what point do you go? Maybe they could stand trial, but can we look at it? It's that whole moral and ethical issue of how do we try someone over here differently from someone over here? But in the case of the man that you were talking about, Ricky Ray Rector, is it Ricky Ray Rector?
Yep.
Triple R.
Yep.
It was just a case that made me go, what if you are different for some reason than for a physical reason that happens to you? It could be brain cancer. It could be amnesia. It could be, that could be easily faked too. But I just think, that's a tough one right there. So what?
Yeah. And it really is, because there's a couple in here that have Joe already had mental illness and also a very low IQ. He was almost childlike in a sense that now, and that was in the 1930s when that happened. So way before any type of, there was no mental health awareness at that time or, anything like that. And it is pretty somewhat widely accepted now that his confession was probably false at the time that he gave it, and that he didn't really know what he was doing. And so when he just asked for vanilla ice cream for his last meal, and actually it's his recipe that's on the cover of the book.
Okay. Was he the one that also said he's going to save something for later? Some food for later?
That was Ricky Ray Rector that said that.
Yeah, so that shows you that he really didn't get it, right? This is your last meal, but you're going to save that for... That shows cognitively he really wasn't getting it.
So, no, he really wasn't. And that was his pecan pie, and that's what we made. That's what I made for the book. was a pecan pie. There's a pecan pie recipe in there, because that was what he set aside to eat later. And so, and just really didn't have the wherewithal to understand what was happening to him.
And that's the other thing that I love about this book. As I was going through it, like I was like, look at that recipe. I'm making that. I love that. I'm hungry. And then I look at what the person did, and I'm like, whoa, okay. Honestly, this one made me sad. This one made me really angry. That delicious is fantastic. I mean, that looks delicious and fantastic. So like, you put me through a whole bunch of emotions, Ashley.
I know. That's what I do.
I love it.
But yeah, his was very sad. I mean, and so there's really this big mixture of people in here. Like I have the people who were inspired, the true crime book In Cold Blood, which was Truman Capote's book. Like they're in here as well. And so there really is a big mixture of people from all over, because like people who don't commit horrible crimes, people who do commit horrible crimes, they're not all John Wayne Gacy and Ted Bundy. Like they're very different types of people, and different types of crimes, really. And you can see that even across, like, of the different types of crimes that were ultimately given capital punishment as their, for their, after they were convicted. But there really is quite a big variation of people. Some people killed one person, some people, like John Wayne Gacy and Ted Bundy, killed a lot more people.
And a much more, I think, I mean, how do you compare murder to murder to murder? But I think you can. Shooting someone, I'm not the victim here, and I'm not the victim's family, so no disrespect is meant here. But I mean, if we look at it like critically, you have someone that killed someone, say, in a gas station and killed somebody, and they were a drug addict, versus somebody who is John Wayne Gacy and methodically went through and chose young men and raped and tortured them and buried them under his basement. That's very different.
Yeah, for years too. Like, right? Like for years, and he did that for years. And there are people who are relatively young too. They're kind of from all different age groups too. Like I wrote about Francis Crowley.
Yes.
He was sort of like a 1930s gangster type, and he is one of the younger people that's been executed. He was executed at the age of 19.
Yes, that's incredibly young. And I know there's again the whole thing of someone who commits a crime when they're 14, now they're 40. Mm-hmm. Do they still get life? I don't want to be the one making decisions on that. And again, I look at it, again, you have to look at it from, each case is so incredibly different than the next. I just think sometimes the across the board black and white decisions on some things don't always fit, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's why we see it come under the scrutiny that it does too, is that it's really hard to make policy at such a high level when things can really be, there's so many moving pieces for this type of thing.
Well, I mean, the 3-strike law, I think, or rule or whatever, you get 3 felonies, that's it. You're done for life. Do I have it right? Because, I'm Canadian, so, I don't know your laws.
I don't actually know. That could be. But I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure.
Our, here in Canada, obviously, there's no death penalty here.
Right.
And I think that sometimes, more than sometimes, we're too lenient on some of the, on some of these killers. For instance, Karla Homolka, and she got out after 12 years. And she was the one, right, with the sister. Is that correct? Am I thinking of the right case with that one? She tortured and murdered her sister, and
with her boyfriend,
with
right?
Paul Bernardo. Yeah, and so he's got life. Okay, good. That's awesome. You're away for life, but she gets out after 12 years. And I think she was the brainchild behind all of it. I really do believe if they hadn't come together, I don't know. They thought Paul Bernardo was the Scarborough rapist. So he'd been doing that for years and years. So then they meet. It's like the perfect storm. And, they're both guilty. But for me, she's living somewhere, I think, is it Quebec? and she's married and she has kids. And so I'm not exactly impressed with, we're just, I think we're too lenient at times, with some of the sentences that people are given. So, what's the happy medium? I don't know. Some countries you get 25 years is considered life, and then you're allowed out. It's, and I don't think that's long enough for cases like, well, I mean, one of our worst here is a guy by the name of Clifford Olson. Have you ever heard of him?
I don't know. I don't think I know that. No.
Obviously we couldn't make a last meal book here in Canada because we don't do that.
He was, if I'm remembering correctly, he's a child killer?
Yes.
Right? Like he killed children. Okay.
He's considered one of the worst that ever happened in Canada. This happened back in the 70s.
Okay.
But like I said,
dead now, he's dead now, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the more recent one, Bruce McArthur, that he killed a bunch of gay men.
Okay.
And he was more of our recent ones. But, I hold out and see how long are they actually going to be in there for? And, hopefully they'll never get out. But sometimes it doesn't roll that way, and it's frustrating. But
right.
So, yeah, I mean, this is great talking to you. I love talking to people about true crime stuff.
Me too.
And don't make me feel like there's something wrong with me.
No, there's so many, and there's so many different types of true crime too. And there's, the American true crime, like there's also Canada, like Europe, there's so many different, because each sort of area has like their kind of well-known cases. And it's always interesting to talk about the different.
It makes me, because I mean, I know, obviously, I mean, being in North America, the American cases, I'm very well read on. I mean, there's a whole ton I don't know about, and I know about here in Canada. But I wonder, is it more of a North American thing, serial killers? I know we're talking about different crimes here in your book, but I start to think. Mm-hmm. Or maybe it's just because we're not in that country. We're not, we don't know as much by not being there. Whereas Canada and the U.S., we're, right on top of each other. We know, a lot of each other's business. But, I wonder if there's just as many in the U.K.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the U.K., I think, has their fair share of, and, it's interesting in the United States, too, of where there's kind of these, where we have more serial killers, it almost seems like, because sometimes there's some regionality to it, I think, too. Like when I look kind of at a map of where looking at, there's a lot in the South, also over in, for a while in the California area, too. So it's kind of interesting to think about, partially, I've always thought that some of it has to do with, which sounds weird, but some of it probably has to do with weather, which is a really strange thing to say. I realize that,
no, I was thinking that. I'm like, I think it's the heat.
Yeah, the heat, or people aren't outside in the winter as much. You don't have accessibility to people in the same way.
It's true.
You're in an area where people are outside year round more often.
I think that's an absolute, what? Yes. That makes absolute sense. As strange as it may seem, it's really not that strange, because you're right. You're bundled up in winter coats, for a big portion of the year, whereas it's always hot there, or mild, decent weather. So, for sure. Do you want to talk about your book and your blog and different things like that, so people can know where to find you and the amazing things that you're doing?
Yeah. So you can find the Serial Killer Cookbook. It's Barnes & Noble, Amazon, all of, you can purchase online. And so, great for Christmas gift. I know a lot of people who have told me they've bought it as a housewarming type of gift, because it's a really nice kind of coffee table read, too.
It is.
It's a good conversation starter. And so, yeah, and I had a really great editor for this book, too. I worked with Claire who works with Ulysses Press, and she's awesome. Just kind of going through, because when you write these books, you do a lot of edits, you do a lot of proofing, and wanting to make sure your language is accessible to people. And with food books, wanting to bring my readers in, but like not, I wanting to make sure that I'm giving them enough details on different crimes, but also like not completely grossing them out too.
Like the vampire ones.
Yes. And I also, when I wrote this book, I also, there are not a lot of child predators in this book. There's some, but I did steer away from that a little bit because just having children myself, like sometimes those are a little bit harder ones to work through, I think.
Yeah.
One of the worst ones, I think, for me personally, when I had to research and write about was probably William Bonin.
Yes.
Who was like the quintessential like scary man with a van type of person and kidnapping children. And so, so I don't have quite as many of them in there. So there's definitely room for a volume 2 someday, maybe. So, but I am also, besides writing this book, I'm also a blogger. I've done that for about 10 years, actually. And I have a blog called Cheese Curd in Paradise. And I do...
You had me at Cheese Curd.
Yes. I know. We, because you guys, in Canada, you guys have, like, it's funny because in other regions, people aren't as familiar with, like, the cheese curd in the same way.
Where in Canada, it's a big thing.
You guys would be. Yes. And here, too, like, the squeaky ones, not just the fried ones, but, like, the squeaky good ones.
The squeaky good ones are the best.
Yeah, because, like, where I live, that's, like, a big, like, you can get cheese curds almost anywhere. Like, they sell them at the gas station.
Yeah, same. Like, yeah. If you're in Quebec area, like, you're going to find cheese curds everywhere.
Yes. And that's how it is here, too. And sometimes when people aren't like, what are the cheeses? It's like, no, they're delicious. Like, they're great. Fry them. You can eat them, like, right out of the fridge where they're delicious. And, if you're lucky. I remember when I worked for the House of Representatives way back, we had a guy who used to come in with these giant Ziploc bags of fresh cheese curds that he grabbed that morning and would bring them in these huge bags for us. It was the best.
Eat them like popcorn, right?
Yeah, so good. But yeah, I focus on like family friendly comfort food types of recipes. I do a lot of seasonal types of things for holidays too. Like right now, I'm in quarter 4 for the year, and so it's always like in the blogging world, that's like our big time of year where it's lots of traffic, and so I do that. And sometimes I'll do some ghostwriting and stuff for other people, and so things like that.
Very cool. Do you develop your own recipes?
I do. Yep. I develop and I photograph everything on my own. So.
Wow, that's impressive. So it's called, can you just say what it's called again?
It's called Cheese Curd in Paradise.
There we go. You guys have to check it out. It's incredible. It seems like everything you publish and put out is a winner.
Oh, thank you. I try.
Well, you succeed. Well, thank you so much for... Sorry. Is there anything else you want to... Because I want people to go out and find you and find everything.
They can find me on my site. I have links to the book from my site, affiliate links from there to Amazon. I also, I work with other, to go on other, true crime podcasts, like Heather, who you talked about before from Nature versus Narcissism. We've done some separate episodes outside of that, too, talking about a Green Bay murder in particular in our area that I have linked on there, too. So if people are curious about that one.
Wicked.
Pretty Wisconsin does not have the death penalty, so none of them are capital cases, like in the way where they can have the death penalty. But so that's another one that you can find. I have all of that linked on my site too.
I'm just so happy that you're able to come on the show. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I love talking about true crime.
Hey, maybe me, you, and Heather, we can do something together sometime.
That would be super fun. I would love that.
Okay, well, I'm just putting you on the spot here, making up a whole other episode. But I don't know I would love to have you on the show again someday if you're open to it, maybe.
I'd love to. Yep, and I've done that with other others before. If there's episodes I can comment on or help with or things like that. I always enjoy doing that.
Well, I mean, because I specifically, pretty much mostly do medical true crime. So I always like talking to people about those cases because you don't hear about them as much. They're not as quote unquote sexy as other cases because, they almost seem more sterile sometimes just because, they often take place within the hospital or related to that. But I personally think doctors and nurses are the most dangerous serial killers out there.
Right, because we trust them the most. we trust them the most.
And we know what to do. I'm not a serial killer. I would never hurt a person. I mean, unless I had to defend myself kind of thing. But in terms of caring for people, we're in a position of trust and care. We're there to help you. But we also know how to like grab something very simple that could end your life. Like, it sounds terrible, but like insulin or potassium. And these people go after the most sick. So it looks like natural death. So that's why I think they're the most dangerous.
Death, right?
Pardon me?
Isn't it the angels of death? Isn't that the term they typically use for like the medical serial? Is that what they use? The killers who are in the medical career, they call them like angels of death sometimes. Is that what they say?
Yeah, some of them are, because they think that they'll say that they're doing it to put people out of misery, but there's plenty of them that just do it because they're sick and twisted. So, you know.
I'm thinking of one in particular because there's what is it? He's the one who he was the one with the Munchausen syndrome by proxy. That was was it Richard Angelo? Is that one of the?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I was thinking of.
Yeah, I've got this page of this list that I just check off as I go down. That there's so many of them out there. So I just have to keep going with this podcast so I can get through them. Hopefully, there won't be too many new ones.
Right.
But well, so thank you for being on the show today. I really appreciate it, and hopefully we can do this sometime soon.
Yeah. Let me know. So feel free to contact me anytime.
Okay, thank you. That was a lot of fun. I totally enjoyed that interview. So I was thinking about something. What I'm picturing in my mind is a Zoom meeting with people that listen to the show. And each person has made a recipe from the Serial Killer Cookbook. And we meet and we eat whatever recipe we chose, and we discuss true crime. So it'll be a virtual true crime buffet conference. So I'm going to post this information on the Facebook group, and if you're not on it, it is STAT, Shocking Traumas and Treatments, go figure, Facebook group. And like I said, I'm going to put some information out there, see if we've got enough people that want to be involved, and I think it'll be a lot of fun. So let's see if this goes anywhere. And I talked to Ashely after I stopped recording, and she may just be interested in being a part of this as well. Tell me what you guys think. So that's the end of today's show. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who listens, everybody who supports me on Patreon. Those of you that leave iTunes reviews, feel free to continue to do that. I love getting them. And to remember to take care of yourself, take care of one another, and most importantly, take care of yourself. Peace. One love.